Ease is generally a poor teacher in life. God knows exactly what he's doing, and he knows that the wilderness experiences in life can often be the time when we fully understand the meaning of life and why we're here.
Welcome to Mission 66, your ultimate journey through all 66 books of the Bible, brought to you by Bible teacher and pastor Dr. Louis Sayao in partnership with Transworld Radio. We know God's Word can change lives, so get ready for some serious discussion as John Matthews and his co-host Esther Sisulu take us through today's study.
Thank you for joining us as we embark in a series on the book of Numbers. Now today in chapters 10 and 11, after the people of Israel leave Mount Sinai, they start to journey through the desert on their way to the Promised Land. Now, if you've ever been in a dry, hot desert, then you know that it's not a bed of roses. It's not an easy experience to go through. And our wilderness experiences at times force us to answer the question, well, who do I trust? Today, John Matthews, our teacher, will bring us the theme, the complaint department.
Esther, thank you so much, and a very warm welcome to Mission 66. It is so good to be with you today, wherever you are and whatever your situation is. You know, we know the Bible is a book that so often speaks directly and inexplicably sometimes, other than the fact that God knows, so it's not inexplicable, but it does speak directly into our lives and our situation. It is a book that is alive. It's a book that has the potential to change us and save us. So let's read Numbers chapter 10 now and see what this has in store. From verse 1, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Make 2 silver trumpets. Of hammered work you shall make them, and you shall use them for summoning the congregation and for breaking camp. And when both are blown, all the congregation shall gather themselves to you at the entrance of the tent of meeting. But if they blow only one, then the chiefs, the heads of the tribes of Israel, shall gather themselves to you. When you blow an alarm, the camps that are on the east side shall set out. And when you blow an alarm the second time, the camps that are on the south side shall set out." Now, an alarm is to be blown whenever they are to set out. But when the assembly is to be gathered together, you shall blow a long blast, but you shall not sound an alarm. And the sons of Aaron, the priests, shall blow the trumpets. And the trumpets shall be to you for a perpetual statute throughout your generations. And when you go to war in your land against the adversary who oppresses you, then you shall sound an alarm with the trumpets, that you may be remembered before the Lord your God, and you shall be saved from your enemies. On the day of your gladness also, and at your appointed feasts, and at the beginnings of your months, you shall blow the trumpets over your burnt offerings and over the sacrifices of your peace offerings. They shall be a reminder of you before your God. I am the Lord, your God. In the 2nd year, in the 2nd month, on the 20th day of the month, the cloud lifted from over the tabernacle of the testimony, and the people of Israel set out by stages from the wilderness of Sinai. And the cloud settled down in the wilderness of Paran, and they set out for the first time at the command of the Lord by Moses. So they continue their journey being guided by God, heading towards the Promised Land. And let's keep in mind that this comes from the time of Abraham, when this land had been included in the promise that God had made to the famous patriarch, establishing a covenant. And so they were set free from the land of Egypt, and they're heading in this direction. Verse 31 here says, "But Moses said, 'Please do not leave us. You know where we should camp in the wilderness, and you can be our eyes. His word to Hobab, if you come with us, we will share with you whatever good things the Lord gives us. So they set out from the mountain of the Lord and travelled for 3 days. The ark of the covenant of the Lord went before them during those 3 days to find them a place to rest. The cloud of the Lord was over them by day when they set out from the camp, and whenever the ark set out, Moses said, "Rise up, Lord. May your enemies be scattered. May your foes flee before you." And whenever it came to rest, he said, "Return, Lord, to the countless thousands of Israel." And we can observe here the theme throughout Numbers is also being made clear, being manifest here. And it's talking about the presence of God among his people. A people that was unsatisfied and constantly complaining about their situation. But God maintains his blessings and his guidance even in the midst of such a complex, complicated community that actually is not so different from the people we see in our world today. Maybe not that different from us. So that's chapter 10, which is ending Esther, and I think you'd agree on a pretty positive note. But the situation changes as we head into Numbers 11. This is verse 1. And the people complained in the hearing of the Lord about their misfortunes. And when the Lord heard it, his anger was kindled, and the fire of the Lord burned among them and consumed some outlying parts of the camp. Then the people cried out to Moses, and Moses prayed to the Lord, and the fire died down. So the name of that place was called Taberah, because the fire of the Lord burnt among them. Now the rabble that was among them had a strong craving, and the people of Israel, they also wept again, and they said, "Oh, that we had meat to eat. We remember the fish that we ate in Egypt? Cost us nothing. The cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, the garlic. But now our strength is dried up, and there is nothing at all but this manna to look at." So the Lord, having sent manna as this supernatural provision, but now, the people were turning their noses up at it. Verse 7. Now the manna was like coriander seed, and its appearance like that of bdellium. And the people went about, and they gathered it, and they ground it in hand mills, or beat it in mortars, and boiled it in pots, and they made cakes of it. And the taste of it was like the taste of cakes baked with oil. And when the dew fell upon the camp in the night, the manna fell with it. Moses heard the people weeping throughout their clans, everyone at the door of his tent. And the anger of the Lord blazed hotly, and Moses was displeased. And Moses said to the Lord, "Why have you dealt ill with your servant? And why have I not found favour in your sight that you lay the burden of all this people on me? Did I conceive all this people? Did I give them birth that you should say to me, 'Carry them in your bosom,' as a nurse carries a nursing child, to the land that you swore to give their fathers? Where am I to get meat to give to all these people? For they weep before me, and they say, 'Give us meat, that we may eat.' I'm not able to carry these people alone. The burden is too heavy for me. If you will treat me like this, kill me at once. And if I find favour in your sight, that I may not see my wretchedness." You can sense the pressure, can't you? And sometimes when we become uncomfortable, we forget the good in our lives. Maybe we are influenced by the negativity and bitterness around us. Maybe we take that on and that becomes part of our spirit rather than a different mindset. Thinking, what good do I have? What is good about my life? Focus on the positive, which enables a grateful heart. But sometimes we complain and we allow our spirits and our mood to drop, as happened here. But notice how God responds to this really honest plea. Don't forget, Moses was a meek man, and he must have been at his wits' end to say to God, what? Where? What do I do? Listen to how God responds. And the Lord replied to Moses, gather for me 70 men of the elders of Israel, whom you know to be the elders of the people and officers over them, and bring them to the tent of meeting, and let them take their stand there with you. And I will come down and talk with you there. And I will take some of the Spirit that is on you and put it on them. And they shall bear the burden of the people with you, so that you may not bear it yourself alone. So Moses went out, and he told the people the words of the Lord. And he gathered 70 men of the elders of the people, and he placed them around the tent. Then the Lord came down in the cloud and spoke to him, and took some of the Spirit that was on him and put it on the 70 elders. And as soon as the Spirit rested on them, they prophesied. But they did not continue doing it. Now, 2 men remained in the camp, one named Eldad and the other named Medad, and the Spirit rested on them. They were among those registered, but they had not gone out to the tent, and so they prophesied in the camp. And a young man ran and told Moses, Eldad and Medad, they are prophesying in the camp. And Joshua, the son of Nun, the assistant of Moses from his youth, said, My lord Moses, stop them. But Moses said to him, Are you jealous for my sake? Would that all the Lord's people were prophets, that the Lord would put his Spirit on them. And Moses and the elders of Israel returned to the camp. So Joshua here means, well, he was afraid that Eldad and Medad were in some way being disobedient or perhaps undermining Moses. But Moses, in a beautiful way, reminds him that the Spirit of God can use anybody willing to obey. Then a wind from the Lord sprang up, and it brought quail from the sea and let them fall beside the camp, about a day's journey on this side and a day's journey on the other side around the camp, and about 2 cubits above the ground. And the people rose all that day and all night and all the next day and gathered the quail. Those who gathered least gathered 10 homers, and they spread them out for themselves all around the camp. While the meat was yet between their teeth before it was consumed, the anger of the Lord was kindled against the people. And the Lord struck the people down with a very great plague. Therefore, the name of that place was called Kibroth Hatava, because there they buried the people who had the craving. From Kibroth Hatava, the people journeyed to Hazeroth, and they remained at Hazeroth.
You're listening to Mission 66, and today we are covering chapters 10 and 11 of Numbers. And John, the complaining was quite prominent in chapter 11. But at the same time, in sympathizing with the Israelites, I feel like we kind of need to give them some space, because let's face it, it's not easy when you're travailing the desert.
No, it certainly wasn't easy. But God is trying to show them and teach them that ease generally is a poor teacher in life for us. Now, I'm not talking about rest here. Now, rest is essential to process life, to switch off, recharge, to get clarity on what we need to learn and what we need to do next. I'm not talking about that, about rest, but I'm talking about being desperate to live a life of ease. But what is God doing? Well, he knows exactly what he's doing here. He knows that the wilderness of life can be the time when we fully understand the meaning of life and what we're here for. And this hot, arid environment, well, he saw was the place to teach them, to try to develop their characters, their readiness for the promise of what was to come, for the promised land. And God knew that these times of testing were essential and that they would not survive or understand their need of God without these times. He also sees that they need to be humbled. They need to realize how dependent, what is their reality? They are utterly dependent on him all the time. What is our reality? It may be a lot less obvious, but it's no different for every person who lives on this planet. We are dependent on him, whether we acknowledge or recognize it or not. And that he is the answer. God also wanted them to see how important it was to trust him, even or especially actually in this case where the people were hungry and thirsty, and how important prayer is, isn't it, on our journey through this life, that we come to God when we get these feelings of hunger, these feelings of need. But see how quickly these wandering Israelites had forgotten the lash of the taskmaster's whips upon their backs and all those brutal hours when they were forced to work in the hot sun making bricks. And they only remembered, with rose-tinted spectacles on, the food of Egypt, scant though it would have been. And Jesus says, once we put our hands to the plough, that is the Christian life, we should not look back, but press on to the eternal prize that soon awaits us.
So just looking back at the text, John, it says here that the people were a mixed group of people. What does that mean again?
Just that there were foreigners among them. It wasn't just Hebrews. So you had people from different lands who had joined them, even Egyptians who had joined themselves to Israel, not in a bad sense, but because they saw something in God's people that they liked, that they wanted to be a part of.
Can you imagine being in charge of this large group of people? Now, look, I don't advocate for complaining at all, but I think, looking at Moses' situation, perhaps he should have been the one complaining here. I mean, I know he did.
Yeah, and I think what he says is justified. I think we look at it and think it's a perfectly reasonable request. Some might say, well, God is God, and he is able to give Moses what he needs to lead these, 2 million people. But perhaps we imagine that Moses was infallible and couldn't make mistakes. But look, the reality is Moses was as human as we are. He gets frustrated, he gets angry, as we do at times. But when he cries out to God for help, God wants us to come to him in honesty. God who is at distance from us, he's a God of love who wants to be in relationship with us. And that's what Moses and God have. They have a relationship. Moses cries out to God for help, and he immediately sends instructions to delegate some of that responsibility to 70 trustworthy men who were going to take some of that workload on and off him.
I can definitely tell you that that's one of the most important takeaways for me so far studying through the book of Numbers, is that relationship that we can have with God. But speaking of the division of workload, can we also apply this principle to the leadership of our churches today?
Yeah, absolutely. The pressures of leadership, well, they're too much for one person to bear. So this is a good example or a good argument for having a group of church leaders. And there is wisdom in numbers. And I think it's a mark of immaturity sometimes for a leader to think that they shouldn't listen to anybody else. In fact, it is. Conversely, it's a mark of maturity, security in oneself, and trust in others when we are able to delegate responsibilities to those, frankly, better able to do a certain job than we are. We don't know it all, and we are not multi-talented to do everything. That's not realistic. God gives each according to his generosity. And I think recognizing that fact is actually an impressive aspect of leadership that I see in others. They're much better at finance. They're much better at organization. They're much better at compiling and putting things together. So delegate to those who are better at doing something than we are.
Now, speaking of those that were chosen, some of the ones who were part of this delegate began to prophesy. And Joshua, he tried to stop them from doing that. Why did he feel that that was important to do?
Well, we know that Joshua was well-meaning here. And I believe he thought these two men, Eldad and Medad, were perhaps overstepping their bounds. There was always that danger of false prophets, wasn't there? People speaking for the Lord when the Lord hadn't sent them. And also perhaps Joshua was afraid that these two guys would try to undermine, even overthrow Moses' authority. But what is Moses' response? Well, he's just not worried. He's in tune, you see, with what the Spirit of God was doing before him. So he calms Joshua's fears. He says, don't be worried on my account. I wish all of God's people were prophets.
Okay, well, let's look now at this section where God sends quail in as food for the people, and yet even after they've eaten, they feel sickened by it. Now, does God answer requests that we may pray about and then, I guess for lack of a better term, punish people for asking the wrong thing?
No, I don't think he does that. But God may allow things to happen, as he's a God who gives us free will. And he knew in this situation that their hearts were not right before him. And that is why this sickness came. Perhaps the biggest learner from this quail is not to let your stomach rule your spirit, for one, but bigger than that, God will give us what we need, not necessarily everything we want. And maybe when we come to God and say, God, I want, maybe God says, okay, have, knowing that that thing is not the best for us. That is not the greatest teacher. Maybe he says, you're not ready to learn the lesson, so I'll provide. But ultimately, when we are given something that reduces our reliance upon God, it either holds us back or pulls us back. It doesn't take us forward, but yet maybe that thing looks more comfortable, looks easier. God may say, because we're people of free will, okay, you want that, you can have that. But very often, it's not the best thing for us.
There's clearly so much that we can glean from these two chapters that we've studied, and I'm looking forward to hearing the summary. So let's get into that, John.
Yeah, well, the theme was entitled Complaint Department. Now, in chapter 10, you have the Israelites, and they're setting out with high hopes and great expectations. But by chapter 11, they're waning. They're in this hot, dry desert. Their strength is being sapped and their tempers shortened. And as often happens to us today, look, we relate to this. I don't know whether you do, I certainly do. When hardship and the difficulty comes upon us, instead of praying and saying, God, help me understand, or just help me if I don't understand to trust you, instead of doing that, praying and trusting in God's provision, they begin complaining to each other. And there's this negative cycle that is in motion, and they criticize Moses. I think a really good point here to be made is, Let's support our church leaders and remember that God is our only true source of any relief and supply. And He may well allow us to go through times of testing for a season. And these times, tough though they are brilliant opportunities to grow in perseverance, in courage, in wisdom, and ultimately an opportunity to become more like Jesus. And what impact does that have? Well, when we are in that state, the world around us begins to change.
And it's on that edifying note that we conclude today's episode of Mission 66. And what a great study it's been. So please be sure to join us next time as we continue studying through the book of Numbers. Myself and John look forward to joining you then. Goodbye and God bless you.
As Mission 66 comes to a close, be sure to download your free study guide at mission66.org. Deepen your daily devotion with insights from each episode, and let John and Esther lead you through the Scriptures. Get your study guide at mission66.org and be prepared for our next episode. There, you can also connect with us, ask questions, or donate to help Mission 66's worldwide outreach. Head to mission66.org. Mission 66 is made possible through Transworld Radio in partnership with Dr. Luis Sayao.